A couple of items to clear first before we get underway with real business. Agenda item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. To take agenda item 4 in private, which is the item for the committee to consider standing order rule changes. Do members agree to take this in private? Great. Thank you very much. Agenda item 2 then is a decision on taking business in private for the committee to agree to consider its work programme in future at a private meeting. Is that in private for us? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's get on to today's business. Agenda item, just kicking off today. There we go. And I would like agenda item 3 to be about the Scottish Elections Franchise and Representation Bill, Representation of the People Act 1983, Remedial Scotland Order 2019. And joining us today are Mike Russell, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Government Business and Constitutional Relations. Welcome. Ian Hawkenhull, Bill Team Leader, Elections Team. And Ewan McCaig, Solicitor, Legal Director at Scottish Government. Welcome everyone, and thank you very much for coming along to meet us today. So, if it's all right with yourselves, we won't need an introductory speech unless you would like to say something, because we've only...
If that was permissible.
Well, it's permissible. It's only because we've only got an hour, but if you'd like to just introduce yourself, that's
I won't take up much of the hour. I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I look forward to working with you on the bill. It uses powers already devolved under the Scotland Act to address the issue of prisoner voting, which is necessary to ensure compliance with the European Convention on Human Rights and to extend voting rights to all foreign nationals resident in Scotland who have leave to remain in the UK. And it does it by allowing prisoners serving 12 months or less to vote in devolved elections, and it reaffirms the existing rights of EU and Commonwealth citizens to votes. Now, I hope one of those is uncontroversial, but the second, obviously, has been a matter of debate and controversy for some time. The current blanket ban on prisoner voting is untenable and unsustainable. I want to work constructively with the committee and the Parliament to find a solution which ensures that we meet our human rights obligations and also cannot be challenged. And I look forward to discussing those issues both today through the various stages of the bill and I hope to completion of the bill.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. That was worthwhile, actually, giving us an idea of your direction there. OK, could we kick off then first with Mark Ruskell, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Can I perhaps start with what I perhaps see as an anomaly within the bill? If you look at what's happening on the television screens at the moment, we've got people in Syria who are dying for democracy at the moment. Many of those people will become asylum seekers, refugees. Some of those people, a small minority of those people, will seek permanent residency in this country. At the moment, the bill doesn't automatically guarantee the rights of those people coming to this country to vote in Scottish elections. They have to seek indefinite leave. And it certainly doesn't guarantee their candidacy. In fact, it offers no candidacy rights to those seeking asylum. What's your view on that? Why has there been a choice to exclude those people from their rights to vote immediately upon entry to this country, upon being resident in this country, and then to extend that to their candidacy rights?
I think we have to be clear about the terminology that's used here, the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker. And that is important because I am very keen that we give the right to vote to everybody we can give that right to vote to who is normally resident in Scotland. And that's the qualification. That's a very wide qualification. There are very few countries in the world that provide that width of definition. But there is a difference between refugee and asylum seeker. And I just want to make that very clear. An asylum seeker has come to mean a person who is seeking refugee status, but whom the government has not yet recognised as a refugee under the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. Under the immigration rules, the Secretary of State will issue a residence permit or humanitarian protection to a person granted refugee status and their family members as soon as possible after the grant of status, may be valid for 5 years. There's a lot of conditions to it. The difference is an asylum seeker will not have that right to remain as yet, and therefore is not a resident. I'm not interested in the issue of permanent residence. People move from place to place. There are opportunities to be registered for voting here for people who are not permanently resident in that sense. But there is a difference in the definition, and it would be very, very difficult in electoral terms to grant the right to vote to people who have no right to be there. Once that has happened in a refugee status, and that's not to do with citizenship, and refugee status, then that right is given. And I do accept there's an anomaly in the bill in terms of standing for election, and I want to clear that up during the bill. And it's one of the things, no doubt, at some stage we'll discuss how we do that. But there is a difference between refugee status and asylum status, and we are absolutely determined that this bill will be as wide as it possibly can be. But there is, even in this bill, there has to be a limit, and that limit is the right to remain. Now, if I may speculate about an independent Scotland, which for some people around this table will be welcome and some it won't be welcome, it might be possible then to find a link between us as a state giving that right and the right to vote. It might happen more quickly, there might be a wider definition. But at the present moment, working within the system we have, that distinction is extremely important.
I'm still struggling to really understand the real difference. If you're in this country, if you are living in this country, you are a resident in this country, you may have a different status in terms of whether you're seeking asylum, whether you have an indefinite right.
You could be removed from this country. That is the issue.
But you're still a person living in this country, a citizen.
And you could be removed and not ever be granted the right to remain. It is that moment. I'm not arguing that that is what I would want to see in the law. I might want to see a very different law in terms of migration being devolved to the Scottish Parliament or an independent Scotland. But dealing, in this bill is about where we are now, and where we are now, the status of an asylum seeker is one that the person could be here today and regrettably, I don't support that, gone tomorrow. And in those circumstances, there would be no opportunity for us to rectify that. So it is a difference between refugees and asylum seekers. This is a very positive bill in terms of granting one of the widest franchises in the world. But there is a limit, and that limit is essentially the ability of an individual to remain where they are, to be on the register and to stand. And that is solely for asylum seekers, who we hope will all have refugee status very quickly. And that solves the problem.
Okay. I think it's welcome that you've committed to look again at the candidacy arrangements, possibly at stage 2. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, I should stress, I've worked on bills with one or two people in this committee before. I'm really keen to develop bills as they go through. And, the bill is, the start of the process, not the end of the process. And there is, I don't know whether you will want to raise it later or not, but there is an anomaly between EU citizens who have the rights to be candidates and non-EU citizens. And that's a hangover from taking forward the position of EU citizens and simply replicating it into a new bill. I think we could do better than that, and I want to do better than that.
Okay, I welcome that. Can I just ask some other sort of broader questions then as well? You've already mentioned, of course, that immigration policy is reserved. What do you see as the potential impact of changes in UK government immigration policy?
Well, we want to, one of the reasons we want to do this now, apart from the fact that we need to do the prisoner voting part, and we've added the franchise element on, is because we are concerned about the tenor and direction of UK immigration policy, which is becoming ever narrower. And we want to guarantee some rights to people. If you look at, if we take a wider issue, which is not directly within this bill, but if you take the wider issue of settled status, I know, and as MSPs, we know the difficulties that individuals are having with that. And the number of people who are getting this pre-settled status, which is a very confusing and difficult thing. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that this bill creates the circumstances in which we have the widest possible franchise now, and we can protect that franchise. Mm-hmm. So we can say these are the people who are entitled to vote here, and the qualification for that is residence. And that seems to me pretty incontrovertible, because once you are a resident, you get the chance to do so. It doesn't mention settled status. The qualification is you're entitled to be here and you're here. Mm-hmm. Now, the UK government is not going to be there forever, hopefully, and I hope that wiser councils will prevail. I do hope at the very minimum that migration becomes devolved. I'd much rather in an independent country we can resolve this ourselves. But the bill is an attempt to create the circumstances that we want to do now to give that wide franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course, at the moment, there are currently fairly low numbers of EU citizens who've actually applied for settled status. So, there's still an anomaly there. Could you also indicate how many foreign nationals could actually be enfranchised by this legislation?
I think we were talking about 50,000.
The figure in the
Policy Memorandum 50,000 is a broad indicator. That the exact figure is also given in the Policy Memorandum from the 2001 census. It was closer to 59,000, but that's obviously a census figure from some time ago.
We will have another figure in the 2021 census.
Yep.
That's roughly where it lies.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Anyone else? Tom, please.
Thank you. Do you not anticipate any pushback? You've got those refugees and people who have the right to remain, and compared with the who have rights to then vote and change Scottish law, and which could, in terms of even if we were independent, would include going to war, where they have the right to make legislation where the citizenships will have to be conscripted and follow any laws to change, whereas those who have just right to remain could in fact leave.
No, I don't anticipate any difficulty in that at all. That is the normal duty of a citizen, is to participate. I think we should welcome those who wish to play that role. Any citizen can choose to leave at any time and go somewhere else. One of the beauties of the EU is that we are able to choose to leave and go and stay in other countries. Regrettably, that's being restricted by your government.
Yes, but I mean, there is a different status there, is there not? Because those who are not Scottish citizens don't have anywhere else to go.
Oh, I think, if I may not coin a phrase, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns. I think we should all be entitled to contribute and to vote and to be part of society.
I see that, but how do you explain it to the Scottish citizens who cannot move out or go somewhere else?
I very rarely meet Scottish citizens who want to move out, except possibly as a result of the policies of the Conservative government.
Thank you.
Yes, and Jamie, please. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Just a couple of things actually around this kind of area that we've been talking about and Mark was talking about. You talk about residency. What's your understanding of the residency rules, requirements, and who would qualify under simply residency, and also what checks that are done to ensure?
Residency is something that is checked by returning officers, by electoral officers in any case. Clearly, to be on a register, you have to be resident. Now, the annual canvass, which we work closely with Wales and with the rest of the UK on, is part of the process of ensuring that residency is recognised and recorded. So, the electoral register has that on it. So, providing you are able to provide an address, and there's no question to any of us here, in the annual canvass, whether we own that property, whether we rent that property, whether we're, biting in on that property. Yeah. So that is a normal thing, and that will be applied to all those who do so. They have the right to residence, and they are there. Now, it may be in certain circumstances a returning officer, in all circumstances, will make further inquiries. They are entitled to do so. But, it is no different from the normal process.
I appreciate that, but I suggest that even with a normal process, there aren't necessarily the safeguards in place to ensure that somebody is actually resident in Scotland rather than with an address in Scotland.
But there is a penalty. I mean, it's like the normal process of law. There is a penalty if you mislead, and it is a criminal penalty in these circumstances. We have, of course, another bill which the committee will be considering in terms of the elections bill that my colleague Graham Day will be giving evidence on. And, in that bill, there are also issues about, double registration. It is still possible to have a double registration in local government elections. We don't think that is desirable. So, that would be a penalty if somebody were to do so. I think the law is providing the regulations and the sanctions, and they should be applied. And they're being applied here in an equal way to all who are entitled to vote.
I appreciate the law is there, and obviously the penalties are there, but that obviously requires the teeth of actually ensuring that the law is upheld, that the checks are done to ensure that. And we're talking about widening the franchise, providing more opportunity for more people to be able to vote in our elections. And I think we're possibly acknowledging at the moment that there are opportunities for people to register without the checks and balances in place already.
I'm not acknowledging that. I'm acknowledging that there is a system to register voters, And if people
That you think secure enough?
yeah, and if people attempt to cheat that system, there are penalties against them doing so. You know, there are no proposals that I am aware of to tighten that. There have been proposals to tighten postal voting, you know, which clearly has been abused in some places. But again, the fact that we know that it's been abused does say something about the effectiveness of the law, which has caught up with those who have abused it.
So I mean, on the basis of this widening of the franchise and whether there are areas, would you support efforts to ensure, perhaps more safeguards to ensure that those people who were entitled to vote, even within the widened franchise, were those that should be voting?
If electoral officers said to me that they needed stronger penalties to do so, I would, of course, listen to that. I have not heard that from electoral officers, nor the Election Commission. But were they in that position to do so? I have discussed with the Election Commission issues such as greater penalties in election campaigns for people who mislead voters, you know, and you know, those are issues in there. Cheating on expenditure limits in election campaigns, or particularly in referendum campaigns in recent history, those are penalties that could be increased. They have not indicated to me, nor do I think to my officials, that they seek further penalties in terms and further actions in terms of registration. Were they to do so, of course, we take it seriously.
I'm conscious of time, so can I move on to a quick couple of points? My understanding is that the UK government is looking to, at UK government elections, residents who are overseas but British citizens are able to vote up to, I think, 15 years after they've lived within an area, and they have to re-register. And the UK government is looking to extend that. Is that an area that you might consider for Scottish British citizens from Scotland living overseas? We
haven't done so. We have a very limited ability to recognise overseas voters, service voters. I think that's the main category. We haven't done so. It is a complex business. I think the experience of the UK government in that has been pretty difficult over a period of time. But, you know, I make the point I've made before about, you know, looking for good ideas. If somebody came with an amendment that seemed workable, you know, and was possible to do, we would, of course, consider it seriously. Okay. It's a very complex area and an expensive area to do. I mean, you're raising the question of, you know, the possibility of not being able to check. It is considerably harder to check in those circumstances.
Of course, I'd appreciate that. Last point, if I may, convener, on this. We're also looking at extending the franchise to a number of voters who are resident in this country. Have you looked at reciprocal agreements with other countries abroad? Have there been any discussions there so that Scots who are perhaps not resident in Scotland for a short period do have voting rights in other countries where they don't at the moment?
We have a nice system at the present moment, I have to say, where, you know, within the European Union there is an ability to vote in certain categories of election. In Ireland, I think British citizens can vote in all elections except referenda, but they can't vote in referenda for particular historical reasons. Those are breaking down, of course, with the process of Brexit. The UK government is following a procedure of bilateral agreement, so that I think they have agreements with Luxembourg and one or two other countries. Do we remember which they are?
Spain and Portugal.
Which allow bilateral agreement. We're following a different route, which is to say, look, you know, we'll do this unilaterally. We're doing it, and we would hope others would follow.
But has there been any discussions
with
the
other countries
to encouraging Scots, the Scotch residents?
We're not in a position to do that. As I said, we have a limited overseas register. But what we will do is provide the opportunity here.
But surely the registered would be those for that country to organise.
We would love people to be able to vote overseas, and there's a marvellous way to do it presently. We don't want to withdraw from that way.
But we're not just talking about the European Union. We're talking about wider. This franchise extends beyond European Union member votes.
Less common elsewhere, I have to say. But there are some places in which they do it, and we would encourage Scots who are abroad.
Nothing's been
not formally. We don't play a formal role in that. But I would encourage anybody who's part of a society to seek the right to vote, if that is legally possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Now, if you don't mind, please, we'd move on to Maureen. Please, you've got some questions about candidacy rights and voting.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Morning, panel.
Morning.
We live in an extremely hostile environment for foreign nationals. People may think that they're here long term, and then all of a sudden find out that they're not, because of a flawed and out-of-date and frankly broken immigration system in the UK. So can I ask you, what's the rationale being taken for having different approaches to voting and candidacy rights. Because, you know, you could just stand for an election, and if you found out that you weren't eligible, if you had been elected, you could just find out, oh my goodness, I'm no longer allowed to be here, and you could just resign from that position.
I wouldn't quite go so far as that, but I have indicated that I think the bill still has an anomaly in that regard. So I do think, with two exceptions, and I'll come to this in a second, with two exceptions, I think the bill should be developed to allow those who have rights to vote to stand, right? And you know, there's this anomaly about EU and other citizens, so we should do that. The two exceptions are there is a difference between refugee and asylum seekers. I think we have to recognise that difference. You know, it would be very, very difficult for electoral officers to have a consistency of approach when they were dealing with asylum seekers, because there is no even medium-term guarantee there. The other area which we did not consult on, and therefore I don't think we're entitled to bring in this bill, but it is an area, it would be an area of active debate, is the candidacy for 16 and 17-year-olds, which is an anomaly that, you know, you can vote in as 16 or 17-year-olds but not stand. We didn't consult upon that. I don't know what the position in terms of public view is on that matter, you know, but you know, that would remain an anomaly. But I'm keen to iron out the anomaly of different types of EU and non-EU nationals in terms of candidacy. I just stress the point I make to Mr. Ruskell about the difference between asylum seekers and refugees, and it is an important one. And I'm quite happy to provide, you know, further definition on that, so that we are quite clear what we're saying, because it's not a desire to exclude anybody. It is, in actual fact, based on a solid, practical proposition.
Okay. In terms of the situation we're in at the moment with Brexit, are you, if, God forbid, that we do leave, are you envisaging a situation post whenever that current EU citizens who have got rights in terms of participation in elections and standing for election will just be treated like the rest of the world?
Yes, they will be entitled to vote just as they are now and to stand just as they are now. In our franchise. We don't control the Westminster franchise. But in the local authority, Scottish Parliament, National Park Boards is the other one, I think, that's covered by our franchise. In our franchise, that will be the case. They will be treated not just like the rest of the world, they'll be treated like anybody around this table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Anyone else want to come in on that? Or we can move on, please, to education for newly enfranchised voters, which, Tom, you've got something to ask?
Well, no, it's more on time frame.
That's fine.
Bringing this thing essentially in 2021, if certain parts of it are ready before then, would it be anticipated that it would come into effect on maybe by-elections before 2021?
I think we would prefer to give the election officers time to bed this in for a major event. So I think our intention would be is that the requirement would be that there's time to build the regulations and to make sure this happens properly. The intention would be that it be ready for 2021, and I don't think we would want to go sooner than that.
And conversely, if it's not all complete by 21, will there be parts of it will be put in place and then the rest would follow, or would it all go into place in one lump?
This bill is a comparatively simple bill, and I think it would be best to put this bill in its entirety. The elections bill is different, but again, we would hope that it was operable for 2021. There could be a number of reasons why it didn't happen. This committee might reject it. There could be lots of reasons, but providing it makes its parliamentary passage, our intention is to have it all ready for 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Can I just jump back to what I was mentioning earlier then, in education for newly enfranchised voters, and we've heard as a committee from a number of organisations who work with those who may be new to Scotland, such as refugees and asylum seekers. But the idea about education for people's right to vote, they may come from a country where they don't have a right to vote or whatever. So what's your view on awareness raising and education that might be required, and is the Scottish Government overseeing this work?
Well, I think there's a role for a number of players in this work. There's a role for the Scottish Government, there's a role for the Election Commission, there's a role for local authorities, and there's a role for electoral administrators. I've been struck by the evidence you've heard, and I would want to say that it's in my mind to see if we can enter into dialogue with some of those organisations to see if there is additional support that we can give those organisations to help the people who they have as clients and people that they work, service users. I think they have given some convincing evidence that there needs to be more done. And that's a positive thing. In a democracy, we should be very positive about encouraging people to vote. So I think as this bill goes through in parallel, this is not a matter for the legislation per se, but as this bill goes through in parallel, I would want to engage with those organisations and to make sure that we were taking it forward and encourage the Election Commission to do so as well. And if the committee wanted to engage with those organisations along with ourselves, I think that would be useful. Maureen, would you?
Yeah, just a small point on that. Clearly, we've heard from the Scottish Refugee Council and other organisations that tend to be based in the Central Belt, and Glasgow is known as a city that welcomes refugees and asylum seekers, but it's not only there. For example, Aberdeenshire have taken a fair number. So I was suggesting that it's not just big organisations, but if I look back to my time as Minister for Public Health, we used Mellas and other celebrations of different cultures as opportunities to increase organ donation in other cultures. So can we make sure that it's widespread rather than just focused on a small number of organisations?
I take the point, in a very direct way, because one of the jobs we will have to do is to spread this message into Rothesay, where we have a large number of Syrian residents now, and I want them to participate actively in the democratic processes on the island of Bute. So, absolutely, this is not just a Central Belt issue. No.
Thank you.
Yes, Neil.
Finance.
Yep, I were just about to move on to that, if that's okay. So, a financial memorandum, please. Sorry, beg your pardon. Gil, would you like to just finish off on that?
Minister, I had a good fortune to visit Govan Hill, visiting the Big Noise over there last week. And I was quite astonished that the cohort in the Big Noise within the children group, 54 different nationalities. In relation to that, I was thinking about this, that a good way I find to reach parents is through children in a lot of guises, and I wonder if the government would look specifically at that, some resource within schools, and maybe even you would need to target schools that can, you can use, and I'll use the word use in the best sense of the word, to inform the parents.
I think that is best done by third sector bodies and by the Election Commission. I'm always aware that the government, interfering in schools on matters of elections can be misrepresented, but I would encourage it to happen, and certainly we will be happy to talk to those organisations about how it should happen.
Okay, thanks for that.
And just very quickly in the back of that, Jamie Halpern.
Yeah, it's a finance thing, but I think it's not the area that Neil Bibby is going to be touching on. I was just wondering, we have difficulties enough sometimes persuading people to vote in certain elections. How much does the Scottish Government at the moment spend on promoting elections, encouraging people to vote, and how much would you envisage additionally would be spent on promoting voting to the extended franchise?
It's the Election Commission that would encourage people to vote. They are an independent body. I think we'd be happy to say to them that you've asked that question and to ask them to brief you on what they actually do.
It would be useful to get an idea of kind of figures on that.
We'll act as the intermediary on that matter and see if we can get you some information.
Thank you.
Thank you, that was very useful, thank you. Well, we don't have Neil Bibby with us today, but we do have Neil Finlay, so we can move on to the financial memorandum, please, and Neil.
It's good to sit next to Jamie Carlow. The financial memorandum initially said it would be between 150,000 and 250,000, and then we had an excellent example of government speak when that was described as over-definitive, which I think means wrong. What is it that? What do you expect the cost to be, or have you got any idea?
Well, we've estimated the cost range in there to say between 150,000 and 200,000. I think the over-definitive thing is an indication that that figure shouldn't have been given, because clearly there was a different view of it from somebody else. The discussions that officials had with that organisation didn't seem to be properly reported. In those circumstances, I think we would stick to the idea that it's 150 to 200,000, but we need to make much more progress on making sure it is accurate. I have seen suggestions it may be less than that, but we will undoubtedly want to make sure that we have an accurate figure for you.
Yeah. I mean, between 150,000 and 200, there's quite a gap. You know, if I was to offer you, I wouldn't lower your salary, Mr. Russell, but if they offer you 150,000 and then 200, and say it might go to 250,000, that's quite a difference.
Well,
but,
I would bite your hand off.
Well, and man of your means wouldn't need such money. And it also says that any additional money that local government might need has to come from existing money. Where on earth is local government going to get any additional money?
My view of this is, and you might be surprised by this when you hear what I've got to say. I've looked at this over the last week or so, and on the money for Scottish Parliament elections comes from the Scottish Government. We are giving money to the Election Commission. I think it is anomalous to say that the local government should have to meet an additional 200,000 out of its own resources, and I want to go back and have a conversation with my colleagues about that to see if we can assist them in some way. I accept it's anomalous, and I think we want to look at that.
So just to be clear, the government's, or your position is that local government should not be using any of its own resources for this purpose.
As usual, Mr. Finlay, you're trying to put me into a corner to be over-definitive about what I'm going to say. I'm saying I would like to try and find a way so that there is not a burden, an additional financial burden on local government. And if you'll give me the space to do that, I will certainly undertake to come back and say where I've got with that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Neil, thank you very much. And Jamie, just would you like to follow up on that?
I apologise to my valued colleague, Neil Findlay, as somebody whose name is often got wrong. Can I ask, in terms of the potential additional cost to local authorities, would you envisage that certain local authorities, perhaps those in remote rural areas, as in the Highlands and Islands, or with other particular needs, might find those costs to be higher proportionally than other local authorities? Is that something that's been looked at?
You might take another definition of it, is that the numbers that they would be dealing with would be lower than the numbers of those in cities. I don't know is the answer. I think it won't be a flat, 200,000 divided by 32, but there will be costs for each authority. And what I want to do is to do some more work on this and to see how we can assist in that. And that will also, I think, require us to say to the local authorities, what is your expectation of this, in terms of where the burden would lie. So I think we need to get to the bottom of that.
What concerns, either administratively or financially, have been raised by local authorities so far? Well,
I haven't had a discussion with local authorities myself. Officials have had those discussions. I would want to find out what their views will now be in the light of what I've just said.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the members for asking the questions on trying to find a stronger answer on the financial memorandum, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for saying that you'll come back to us on that as well then. Thank you. That's great. Could we move on, please, to the business of prisoner voting, which you mentioned yourself in an earlier stage. Section 4 of the bill provides that prisoners serving sentences of 12 months or less have the right to vote at both Scottish Parliament and Scottish local government elections. We did have questions brought to us by outside bodies, including the Howard League, who described that proposal on prisoner voting as being too unambitious, arguing that it represents the minimum level for compliance with human rights obligations. Do you have a view on that at all?
Well, we did consult on this, and we know that there are a range of views on this matter. The Scottish Parliament Committee, looked at this, and there are people who are dead set against any change. There are people who are very enthusiastic about a complete change. I think the consultation showed us a range of opinions, and we felt that the 12-month one was the one that sort of sat most happily within that range. So that is our proposal. Now, the Welsh Government, I understand, will be proposing 4 years, and like to take it forward. And I think a committee of the Welsh Government, Welsh Parliament moved on that direction yesterday.
The vote yesterday was on Foreign Nationals.
Foreign Nationals.
They have made a public statement on prison voting.
So they want to move in that direction. So we've made a proposal of 12 months. We think there is a justification for it in terms of the justice system, in terms of how the justice system works. The number of people affected is not inconsiderable. We think it's a better proposal than the UK government has made, which has not been legally tested. And if that were to happen, I'm not a lawyer, but it seemed to me that ours is more robust in those circumstances. So we put that on the table, and that's what we want to do. We also recognise the time. There isn't unlimited time to do this. The original judgment was in 2005. We assumed responsibility for the franchise in 2017. We need to get on and do this. The one election within our franchise, since we assumed responsibility for it, we had to take remedial action in the Shetland by-election. So we need to get on and get this done. The proposal's there, it's in the bill. I would try and gather people round it to get it through.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can we have Gil first and then Neil? Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder, Minister, have you got a fixed view on that, or are you persuadable? If I could say to you, for instance, that if you think about the short term, that 12 months is in the electoral cycle, to maintain that, I think, with the best will in the world, there's going to be folk having to be working on that all the time, and so therefore no respite, where if, just for practical reasons, forget about the political reasons at the moment, and I might come back to that, but for practical reasons it might be a good idea to extend it so that people are actually on the register for a while, because I know that registers are out of date in normal circumstances. 10% the day they're published, they're out of date. So to try it for a conviction and then the time of the election, etc., I see that as a difficulty in itself. Whereas if you extended it, that would ease
this
that
proposal
problem.
applies to people who are on the register anyway. There is only a very, very limited subsection of people who might be eligible to vote who aren't on the register and who might be registered at the address of the prison. So I don't think, there's also a continuous process of voter registration. So I don't think that is a difficulty. I think the objection would come, if people either thought 12 months was arbitrary and you could do better, or who had a rooted objection to prisoners voting. But I think the technicalities of administering this are not complex. And the Prison Service has expressed its willingness to be part of the process, both in terms of administering it and in terms of prisoner education and giving the opportunity. I mean, apparently, Prisoner Service would be willing to host hustings, which would be an interesting experience. So that's good.
Well, that's good. That kind of leads me into the next question, and it comes to the politics of it, if you like, in relation to if we are trying to make life better for prisoners and encourage them to reform and benefit from being part of society. And I do get the idea, because I've got the same idea myself, that there's maybe people that I would not consider that they should be getting the benefit. But I wonder if the cut-off of 12 months and the type of crimes that are involved, say, for up to 4 years, which would seem a better, for me personally, I may well put that to you, would seem a more reasonable figure where it's still low-level crimes, and they would benefit, people would benefit from, particularly women, I think, would benefit from having the ability to participate in a democratic vote.
12 months marks the difference between is the maximum sentence being imposed in a summary trial. That's one not involving a jury. So in those circumstances, there's a clear legal justification for this. In our view, there should be a relationship between the seriousness of the crime and the ability to vote. Some people would disagree with that, but that's the view that we've taken. In those circumstances, this sets that line. Above that, because there could be a jury trial, they would be seen to be more serious. This was supported by the largest group in the consultation, not by a majority. There was no majority in the consultation, but the largest group supported the 12-month option. So, as I say, we put that on the table. That is our proposal. And we think it's a reasonable and moderate proposal that will meet the requirements and does something significant. It moves the issue on. There are some countries that allow complete blanket voting. There are some that don't allow it at all. There are some countries in which it becomes part of the sentencing policy and the judge can choose to disenfranchise or not. There are some in which the disenfranchisement lasts beyond the prison sentence and has to be lifted by a court. There's a whole range of practices. I think we are putting ourselves in the mainstream. We're resolving the issue, but I think we're reflecting also where people are.
Well,
That's my view.
My last question on this is there an administrative reason that 4 years would cause great difficulties in this for the prison service, the electoral commission, the government, or for anyone? Is there a tangible reason why 4 years would
there's
be
a tangible reason for choosing 12 months, which is what we have done, and I've indicated what that tangible reason is.
Yeah, I understand that.
If there was a justification for choosing 4 years, then no doubt people would want to make that case. I am not aware of any deal breaker, in terms of administration, but I don't think it's where the argument should be, and therefore we'll support 12 months.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Gil. You'll not be surprised that this has excited a wee bit of interest. So could we first have Neil, then Jamie, and then Mark? Thank you.
I don't quite follow the 12 months. I mean, I understand what you've just explained, but what is it that removing the right to vote for those over 12 months does? Is it rehabilitation? Is it punishment? What is it?
Well, we're going into the realms of sort of philosophy here and penal philosophy.
Yeah.
The view of removing the prisoner right to vote is an indication both of punishment and disapproval. I mean, that's where it has been. And it has been seen to be a view that society wishes that to happen. And that's why it has been enshrined in legislation. Many people do not believe that that is correct and want to see it removed in its entirety. Understand that.
Which do you believe?
Sorry?
Which position do you
I believe that we should get, on this occasion, a compromise to move this forward, because I think there are extremes in this position. So I think the compromise is a position that we're putting forward.
But if we
which is a 12 months one, which says it would be useful and important for some prisoners to be able to vote. There is a means by which to do. We are required to do so, under the European Convention, and therefore we had better get on with it.
So it would still be you would still regard it as a punishment?
I would regard it as a sign that society did not wish to enfranchise all those who are serving prison sentences, but no longer took the view that all those who are serving prison sentences should be disenfranchised automatically. Equally, it would also show that this is a decision for the Parliament to make, because some have suggested that judges should do it as part of sentencing, and the judges themselves have indicated they don't want to do that.
So that would be regarded as, I mean, what you're saying effectively is that it's still a punishment, yeah?
It is an indication of society's disapproval.
So, with that then, do you think there's many prisoners who, at the point of thinking about committing a crime, say, might not have the chance to vote for Mike Russell at the next election?
I have no answer to that. I have no idea how often the image of me flits through a prisoner's mind. No idea. You may flit through prisoners' minds too. I have no idea.
I just find it it's difficult to follow the logic there. It just seems to be that out the consultation, it's just let's find something that's a bit of a compromise, probably keeps nobody happy, and we'll go with that, rather than there be a principle behind it. Because there doesn't appear to be any principle behind it.
I think there's a number of clear principles. One is we should observe the legal judgment, and that's what we are doing. So if somebody votes against this proposal because they don't want prisoners to vote at all, they're going against the judgment and against that interpretation of the European Convention. There is a principle that we no longer believe that a blanket disenfranchisement is correct, and that there should be an element of ability to vote. It shouldn't automatically be removed. I think that's reasonable enough.
And given that there's moves afoot to do away with sentences shorter than a year, how does that stand up to this?
I'm not sure the two things are connected in any way. I mean, the here is a principal position that we've looked at. We've come up with a compromise. We've justified that compromise. I think that's a fair thing to do.
They're not connected.
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
Thank you very much, Neil. Jamie.
Just two areas. Just before I do, I mean, I'm going to talk about the kind of. I'd like to ask you about Shetland because any practical issues which you may or may not be able to answer.
Yeah.
But one area I could see, and you mentioned hustings, potential hustings within prisons. That could be excluding for candidates that may not feel comfortable going into a place like that, a place like a prison, particularly on the basis. Well, if you're talking about hustings have the candidates. If you're a victim of crime, you may not be able to go and be if you're a candidate.
I would accept.
So
I would accept that may be an issue for some people. I would want to try and support them in that.
Yeah.
We shouldn't exclude people simply because on the basis that we can't arrange a husting.
I wasn't really necessarily looking for a response from you, but I'm just saying there are practical issues. And I was going to ask you about the Shetland by-election. What issues perhaps you're aware of that may have been raised there? If you know of anything like that, you may not be able to answer.
There have been no issues raised. I mean, I answered questions on this at the DPLR committee. We've had no submissions. I think I'm allowed to say that. The time for submissions under the order is in November. To date, there have been none, so there's been no feedback on that. I cannot tell you how many people voted because I don't know.
Yeah.
We wouldn't inquire into that. It would be wrong for us to inquire into how many people have voted. We took that action because we believed, as a responsible government that accepts the rule of law and respects human rights, that we had to do so. And my only regret on that is I wasn't able to take it to a committee before we did it because of the timing. The setting of the by-election was done after we had risen. But at the very first opportunity, I went to speak to the committee and we did it. But I can't say, I don't know if anybody used it, but I do know we did the right thing.
I do appreciate that. 'Cause I recognise that the information may not have either come to you or may not be available there. It would be useful, perhaps, if any concerns were raised, that they were fed back into this committee.
Well, they have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have representations under the order, we have taken the position from the beginning that we will talk about those and we will implement anything we think is useful. So far, there haven't been any.
Yeah.
We passed the order. The election officials put into place the arrangements they needed to place. We do not know and will not know ever how many people voted, because that's wrong that we should inquire about that, and the process came to a conclusion.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Can I ask just another very quick point? Does the increase in franchise, would that exclude those who had committed offences which were related to electoral fraud?
That is an important issue, and I think we need to look at that as the bill progresses. There are circumstances in which that is true, even in jurisdictions that permit prisoners to vote no matter the circumstances. I think I'm right in saying that Canada, which has now introduced a much more liberal policy, I think the courts in Canada have decided that there should be voting, but they've excluded those who have committed electoral fraud. I look as if Ian looks as if I might have gone beyond my briefing.
You're supposed to be looking at each other both for an answer.
I'm now nervous that I may have not told you exactly. Certainly there is a country, I believe it's Canada, that excludes those who have committed electoral fraud. And I think it is a serious issue. I'd be happy to work with the committee on it.
Okay, so at the moment it doesn't exclude them, but you would be willing to look at...
Absolutely. I mean, there is, we could have this debate. I mean, if you believe that there should be no restrictions on prisoner voting, then to some extent you believe that no crime is a crime which excludes you from it. So, if murder doesn't exclude it from you, why should electoral fraud? There are other jurisdictions that say, if you are guilty of electoral fraud, you should have the right to vote removed. I know that there is someone that does that. We will come back to whether it's Canada or somewhere else.
I think
just says it can't happen.
I think that would be helpful, because I certainly think from a public perception point of view, and I appreciate we're looking at a bill from the legal and the legislative side, I think the public would find it very difficult to see those who have actually been convicted of electoral fraud being given the right to be involved in the electoral process in this kind of condition. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for that. Then Mark, please.
I think, like Neil Finlay, I'm struggling to sort of bottom out what you described as the kind of underlying penal philosophy behind the 1 year. Because effectively what you're saying is that the government's position is that any citizen that goes through a summary trial and is then convicted of a serious crime then faces a civic death, effectively.
That would be the effect of what we're recommending, yes.
So you don't see any differentiation in the circumstances or the serious nature of that crime. It's just an arbitrary cut-off. If you're over a year, you've gone to summary trial, you're convicted of a serious crime, that's it. That's the dividing line.
I think you could make a broad assumption that, the longer the sentence, the longer and more detailed the proceedings, the more serious the crime. That's a broad assumption. There will be anomalies in it, but there's a broad assumption, and that's the assumption we're making. You might dispute that assumption, but that's the assumption we're making.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark. Can I just ask something that's a wee bit technical, possibly, rather than the overarching scheme? You did mention the idea that had been brought up about hustings and such like taking place in prisons for prisoners. Would that then come to mind? Would it come to mind then that prisoners would be voting in their own original constituency or within the constituency of the prison? Because if someone was going to go in as a hustings and speak to you, you'd imagine it would be the people who were local to that area.
Well, there are examples, as you know, as everybody in this room knows, that you would go to a hustings in which the party had representatives, not the local representatives per se. No, people would be registered to vote where their home was. And that's not in any sense certain that would be where the prison was. There are some very, very limited circumstances in which the prison would be seen as the electoral address, and those would be to do with individuals who had no other address but were entitled to vote. But by and large, the prisoners involved would have an address where they would vote, and it would be all voting would be done by post or proxy, and no physical voting would take place in that regard. Prison service would also have to ensure that there was privacy for postal voting, just as individuals, in institutions would have to do that in any case.
That's true. That's true. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. I would like to thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and your officials for coming along, and also thank you for the fact that you have given us some commitments to coming back to us on certain issues. And we may, if it's okay with you, invite you back at some future point, because I think that was very helpful. So thank you very much indeed.
And no doubt we will have a stage 2 process in which we will also be meeting again.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. We'll give you time, the Cabinet Secretary and officials to leave, and that ends the public part of the meeting. Thank you.